bear with me in terms of the background. I am in a new apartment. I don't have all of my furniture yet. Eventually, I will have like either the ability to record in my living room because I'll have a couch and a chair. I don't have that right now. Or I could record somewhere nicer in my room with like a little bookshelf in the corner or something. I don't have that right now. So you're just gonna deal with me standing in my room talking about stuff with just closets and a door behind me. Deal with it. I'm very excited to talk about this House of Night video. I have notes. I should open them to the appropriate page first. That would help. Prophetesses in the House of Night. Originally, I had started recording while I was unpacking. It was extremely haphazard and chaotic. I deleted the footage because it was 30 minutes and I don't think I said anything particularly coherent or useful. So I instead wrote notes. But one of the things I started talking about in that video was the role of prophetesses and specifically Aphrodite within circles. And I was like, hold on, I could talk about this. And so I started writing notes based on some of the stuff I thought about during that video. I also just now was editing my queerness in the House of Night video. And while going over that brainwave I had about Shaylin and Nicole and what Nicole could have been as a character made me realize brainwave for prophetesses in the series. Let's go. I'm so excited to talk about this because it's basically just me talking about like this would have been a cooler book idea, but it's really fun and I want to talk about it because I think it's really cool. Bear with me, I do need to look off of my notes periodically. First, we're going to start by explaining what a prophetess is in the context of the House of Night series. Loosely, a prophetess is usually, well, in terms of the actual text of the series, always a female fledgling or vampire who has some form of psychic or intuitive ability that gives her insight into the future or the people around her or the will of Nyx. In the series, we know 3 prophetesses. The big one is Aphrodite. The next biggest one would probably be Shaylin. She's introduced very late in the series, so she ends up not filling as big of a role, but she is very important. Aphrodite has psychic visions. Shaylin has true sight. And lastly, we have Cremesha, who is a prophetess and writes prophetic poetry, but isn't included as often in conversations about and with prophetesses. She mostly just like when Stevie Ray's really having her own arc, she gives Stevie Ray prophetic poems, and that's like prophetic service to Stevie Ray as a high priestess. But then when Stevie Ray's subplot is kind of, less prominent, I mean, she gets together with Phiam and then her subplot kind of ends, Cremesha also becomes a bit more background and she just gives poems to Zoe, but she's not really like regarded as a prophetess in the same way that Aphrodite and Shaylin are. Anyway, do note Aphrodite and Shaylin are both white. Cremesha is black. Make of that what you will. Now that we've established loosely what a prophetess is, let's ask some questions because that's the main way I know how to convey the issues here or just the thoughts I'm having. So most prophetesses that we've seen can't control their affinities, really. Cremesha doesn't control when she gets a poem like a prophetic poem come to her. She just thinks of a poem and writes it down and it's like, oh, that's a prophecy from Nyx. Aphrodite doesn't control her visions. They just happen. She's also often not in control during her visions, and they are like really disorienting. We'll get to that. Shaylin kind of has control over her ability, but not really. It's a passive, constant thing. She has true sight, so she's just always seeing people's auras and seeing into who they are as a person. And it's not really a thing that she like turns off and on. The only thing she really controls is how she uses the ability and interprets it and how she like conveys or shares what she reads into someone through their aura. But they don't really control their abilities. And I think that's kind of interesting because like the whole point of a prophetess is to communicate Nyx's will or give warnings of what's to come or like, right? So like why would you give them an ability they can't control and then want them to do these things? Like that doesn't make sense to me. Going back to Aphrodite and her visions, why are her visions so painful? Aphrodite literally will have visions and start bleeding from the eyes. She passes out after visions. I think she's vomited after a vision before. Why would Nyx give Aphrodite visions that are so incredibly hard to understand what's happening when she's in the vision, communicate what's happening after the vision, and to generally just like function after she's had a vision? How is that conducive to her being a prophetess and sharing Nyx's will or warnings of the future or like right? Like, what is she supposed to do if she is incapacitated by her psychic abilities? I understand from a narrative dramatic purpose why that's done, but your dramatic narrative purposes should also probably make sense with the world building, especially because Nyx is like a character. It's not this unseen, invisible will forced upon the people. Like, Zoe has conversations with Nyx on the regular, so we should understand what Nyx's like reasoning for doing things are, at least on some level. Also, what exactly makes someone a prophetess? I know I did loosely describe what a prophetess is, but like, it seems odd. Like, Aphrodite having visions. Okay, yes, that's prophetic. That makes sense as a prophetess. Shaylin writing prophetic poems. Prophecy, prophetess, makes sense. Did I say Shaylin or Kermisha? Kermisha writing poems. Shaylin having true sight. She's not prophesizing anything. She's just looking at people and being like, that person's an asshole. That person's secretly nice. Like, that's basically what she's doing. So what's prophetic about that? I don't understand. And if it's just that intuitive abilities can be considered a gift of a prophetess, then isn't Neferet a prophetess because she can read minds? Wouldn't Nicole be a prophetess because she had the ability to read thoughts by touching someone? And if we're going with intuitive abilities and mind reading abilities and stuff like that, then what about people with the ability to commune with animals? Like, again, Neferet can talk to cats. Lenobia can communicate with horses. Are these a type of prophetess ability? Because again, it's just additional insight into another being's psyche, similar to true sight. So what about, like, what makes one a prophetess and not the other? That isn't really clearly defined. Also notably, later there's a character named Casey in the Otherworld series, and she's regarded as a prophetess, I'm pretty sure. But she doesn't have any visions. She just gets feelings about things, and she can like sense when old magic has been used, I think, which also randomly Aphrodite now can sense, which that's a retcon, but sure. But if that's the case, if just having really strong gut feelings and even having visions, actually, that would mean that Zoe is a prophetess because Zoe has psychic dreams sometimes, and she has really, really strong gut feelings about things because Nyx is communicating her will directly to Zoe. So is Zoe a prophetess, or is that just a thing that happens to high priestesses? But if that's just a thing that happens to high priestesses, then why isn't Stevie Ray having psychic dreams? Because Stevie Ray is also a high priestess. And also then in the Otherworld series, that would mean that Shaylin, Shawnee, and Damien should also all start receiving this level of psychic connection to Nyx, right? Like, if that's a thing that a high priestess also gets, then why aren't these high priests and high priestesses getting these types of directives and communications from Nyx? And then also, if it's just a connection to Nyx that makes someone a prophetess, right? If it's just them being a direct line of communication to Nyx and Nyx's will, then what is the distinction between a prophetess and a high priestess? Or if being a high priestess also can convey these psychic abilities onto the high priestess, then what is the need for a prophetess, right? Like, if Zoe's having visions and gut instincts given to her from Nyx, then why does she need Aphrodite to have visions? Why does she need Kermisha to deliver poems? Why does she need Shaylin to intuit a person's intentions or character to her when she's already getting that information herself? I would also pose the question, even if it is having a really strong connection to Nyx and a like personal relationship with Nyx that makes someone a high priestess or even a prophetess, then what about Rephiam? Because Rephiam was personally redeemed and transformed by Nyx. So what does that make Rephiam in terms of the social and religious hierarchy of vampire society? Right? Because it doesn't matter that he's a human or that he's not a vampire, because Aphrodite is no longer a vampire for, between the end of Chosen and halfway through Loved, which is, I don't know, 9 books or something. Aphrodite is not a vampire. So you don't have to be a vampire to be a prophetess of Nyx. So why isn't, like, what's going on with Rephiam then? What is he in relation to vampire society and their religious and cultural beliefs? Also, Grandma Redbird, we could have a conversation about that because she is also psychic. That's a racist stereotype because she's a Native American and she's explicitly described as psychic because she's Native American. But what is that in terms of Nyxism? Because Nyx is every goddess. So if Grandma Redbird has a strong connection to her goddess and has psychic feelings because of this, then is Grandma Redbird not some form of prophetess? I don't know. So my do-over would be the prophetess is the one who has a direct communication to Nyx. Maybe it's one way, maybe it's two way, maybe it's only through like cryptic visions and messages. I don't know. But the role of the prophetess is to communicate this information to the high priestess, whose job is then to enact Nyx's will and like lead her community or like whatever group she's in charge of as a high priestess, to lead them in following Nyx's will and honoring these visions and messages and stuff. Another question I would have, relating specifically to Aphrodite, is why is Aphrodite a wild card for the elements? This is a thing that starts in like Hunted, where they just randomly are like, Aphrodite can hold an element and then represent that part of the circle. That's just a thing Aphrodite can do. And it's never really explained why. So I think a possible do-over could be, this could be a role of a prophetess, like prophetesses in general, and this could be part of why a prophetess is so important to a high priestess, because if the high priestess always has a prophetess serving her, then she always has at least one person who can fill any role in the circle. And so that would mean that you have the high priestess and you have the prophetess, and then you also have like whoever else is in the high priestess's circle. So normally it would be the high priestess plus 4 other people and then her prophetess. And then if something happens to one of the 4 other people, then the prophetess can step in, whether that's injury or death or absence or whatever. Then you're not like, you know, screwed over because you're missing a person. Well, the prophetess is here so she can step in. That would like make sense and kind of solidify her role in you know, a high priestess circle, and also reduce the risk for the high priestess in terms of her ability to carry out spells and stuff. It could also be, rather than filling all roles in the circle, it could be that a prophetess specifically has a heightened connection to spirit. Maybe not a full affinity, but as someone who has a direct connection to Nyx and receives these visions of like the future or people's intentions or what have you, it would make sense for a prophetess to have a really strong connection to spirit. And so that could be a role that a prophetess can fill in a circle, which again would just like make more sense. And then in the case of like Aphrodite filling a role for Zoe has all the elements, so Zoe can fill any role in the circle, and then Aphrodite could fill spirit in Zoe's place, because normally Zoe does spirit and then her friends do the other elements. But if Aphrodite can do spirit, then Zoe can fill one of the other spaces, and same effect, it just reduces the risk of being without a circle member. I also think it would make sense if the prophetesses were trained in leading a circle. I'm just going to read from my notes because I think I wrote it down effectively. Prophetesses should also be trained in leading circles. This makes sense with regard to their connection to Nyx, especially in light of so many visions and poems being about specific spells and rituals. It would also justify the number of impromptu circles where someone just knows what to say and do. Because this is a thing that happens constantly with Zoe, where she's like, I guess we're circling about this, and then she just recites beautiful poetry while calling the elements. And I'm like, you came up with that on the fly? But she's just like, I felt the words Nyx wanted me to speak. And it's like, this would make more sense if it was the prophetess doing it, because the prophetess would be the vessel through which Nyx speaks, and it would make sense. And again, if a prophetess is specifically able to fill the role of spirit or some other element in the circle, it would make sense for her to then be trained and equipped to lead circles, right? That would like create a more defined and clear role for her in vampire society, especially from a religious and cultural perspective. I also think that every high priestess should have a prophetess serving them. This would include, so it wouldn't just be Zoe and Stevie Ray who have a prophetess, or in Zoe's case, like 3 prophetesses, but it would also include Neferet, Shawnee, Shaylin, and Damien. I have a note to get to about Damien, but we'll talk about the others first. It is also notable that although Stevie Ray did have a prophetess in the original series, especially when she was having her whole, little arc with Rephaim, Cremisha was her prophetess, but then in the Otherworld series, Stevie Ray goes to Chicago and Cremisha doesn't come with her, and then Stevie Ray comes back to Tulsa and Cremisha goes to Chicago. So Cramisha no longer serves as Stevie Ray's high priestess. I guess, no, because Stevie Ray, I was going to say, Stevie Ray isn't a high priestess anymore because she left her school, but no, she is still a high priestess because she's still on the North American Vampire High Council. So she's still serving as a high priestess on that council. So she should still, in my do-over world, she should still have a high priest, not a high priestess, she should still have a prophetess serving under her. I also want to specifically talk about the idea of Neferet having a prophetess serving under her. How cool would it have been for Neferet to have an evil prophetess serving her? Or to have a prophetess who had been like a good and like a, you know, loyal to Nyx and serving Nyx's will, but then Neferet corrupts her over the course of the series, and then that becomes like the first prophetess of the White Bull and like the first prophetess of darkness. That'd be so cool and fun. But even if we just went with the angle of like an evil prophetess, when Neferet splits off from the House of Night and we're introduced to Nicole as one of the like evil red fledglings who doesn't follow Stevie Ray, Nicole should have been Neferet's prophetess because Nicole has a psychic ability. She can read minds through touch. And so, and I talk about this in my Queerness in the House of Night series, it would have been a really fun foil to Shaylin because Shaylin can see into people and like just look at people and know who they are at their core. And Nicole can, did I say those names right? Shaylin with True Sight, and then Nicole can just touch people and see into their thoughts and read like their intentions and who they are. And I just think that would have been really fun to play off of. I need to write a series that plays with these ideas because these are good ideas and they'd be fun to write. I do also want to talk about Damien as a high priest and the idea of him having a prophetess serve under him, and especially the question of like, Damien as a high priest is extremely unique. He's the only high priest we ever meet in the series. He's the only character we ever see become a high priest. And so there's not a lot of conversation about like the gender of it all because in the House of Night series perspective, Damien's gay, so he's basically a woman. Not how that works, but okay. But it would have been interesting to see an exploration of like, how is gender regarded in terms of your connectedness to Nyx? And would there have been some kind of power struggle or imbalance between Damien and a prophetess if he did in fact have a female prophetess serving under him? Or would it have also been interesting to explore the idea of him having a prophet serve under him? What if Jack is a prophet? Because Jack technically had a psychic ability because we never see him use it, but he has an affinity for technology. And if affinity for technology means that he has a psychic connection to like computers and networks, then he could be like a modern prophet of modern communication and those channels of like information and connectedness, and like that could have been so fun. Now I'm making myself upset because these are fun ideas that didn't happen. Anyway, point is, that would have been an interesting thing to explore, is even not specifically connected to Damien, but having a male prophet somewhere in the series would have been really interesting. The series is extremely rigid in its gender roles. I could do a whole video on that, but it would have been interesting to see some actual commentary and discussion on the relationship between, you know, how connected someone is seen as being to Nyx and, you know, their gender. Like, are men... do people doubt Damien's ability to be a leader because he's a man and like men aren't supposed to be that connected to Nyx kind of thing, right? So in the series, there are some moments where a prophetess is allowed to fill a similar role to a high priestess, but like in weird ways. So a high priestess can have an oath-sworn warrior. So can a prophetess. And this is talked about in relation to Aphrodite and Darius, when Darius swears an oath to her and Aphrodite's like, but I'm not a high priestess. And Darius is like, but you're a prophetess, and that, you know, serves just as well. So the idea that a prophetess can serve a similarly important role to a high priestess and thus have an oath-sworn warrior makes me feel that a prophetess should also be allowed to have a consort and a mate, because a high priestess is allowed to have both a consort and a mate. A mate is a vampire partner, a consort is a human partner. I think that a prophetess should be allowed a similar, you know, relationship dynamic. It's not clear why a high priestess is allowed to have a consort and a mate. I think the idea is that the consort would be her warrior and the mate would be her source of blood. But like the same should be true of a prophetess, because a prophetess is so connected to Nyx and is so important to the high priestess that they should also be very protected and also have a source of blood, because like blood, it's not just food, it's also how they like it accelerates healing and stuff like that. If you drink blood when you're injured, you'll heal faster. And it's also some spells you need blood for. I also think, reading from my notes, instead of Aphrodite's redemption involving deslutification, that's my term for it, it can instead be a normalization and even celebration of being sexually open and or pursuing multiple partners. Because Aphrodite in the original series, especially in the first like 3 or 4 books, is heavily slut shamed. She doesn't even have multiple partners. It's just that she like wears short skirts and proudly has sex, I guess. So she's like super shamed and ridiculed for that and like vilified for it. And then when she gets together with Darius, there's this whole big deal made about the fact that like, oh my gosh, haven't even slept with Darius, and like maybe that's why I've been able to fall in love with him, and like that's part of her redemption. And I just think it would have been better and like more actually sexually positive and empowering if the message was instead, no, like Nyx respects and honors and celebrates having multiple partners, having, you know, an open or fluid sexuality, and Aphrodite being allowed to have, even if she doesn't end up pursuing multiple partners, but being allowed to have multiple partners, I think would have just been better. Also, conceptually, that would mean that in the vampire world, if you are inclined towards polyamory, then you might be destined to serve Nyx, because then both high priestesses and prophetesses are allowed, like societally allowed, or perhaps even expected to be polyamorous. So if you find yourself interested in multiple partners at once, you might be like, Nyx, what do you want? That's about all the notes I have. But I just thought those were some really fun ideas. I think the concept of a prophetess and like the relationship between a prophetess and a high priestess and a prophetess and like a circle serving Nyx, like I think those are fun, interesting ideas. It's just not defined in the series really. And it feels very much a like, well, I need an answer to this problem, so here's someone with the power to do this thing. Or like, well, the characters need to get information about this thing somehow, so here's a vision. Like it just feels very convenient and like just a tool the author is using, which like, yes, every character and ability is a tool that the author is using, but it doesn't have to feel like that. It can feel a little more grounded and defined. And so I just think that would have been really fun. I especially am, Nicole as an evil prophetess of darkness, offset or like foiled by Shaylin as, you know, a prophetess of light and true sight, would have just been like, and they would have been bi. It could have been so good. It could have been so good. Anyway, that's all I have for this video, I think. I've rambled enough. If you like this video, please comment. Maybe like a crystal ball emoji, because I'm talking about psychic powers and stuff. Also, let me know your thoughts on, like, if you've read the series or if you've just been following along and have thoughts on the things I've been talking about. You know, things you think should have been done with prophetesses in the series. Or like just the idea of prophetesses in general in the context of what I've talked about in this world. And yeah, I have links below for my, well, I'm posting these on Patreon now, so I don't have a link for my Patreon, but I do have a link for my other social media and for where I have my writing hosted. Currently it's on Itch.io. As of when I'm recording this, there's some dicey stuff going on with Itch.io, so we'll see if I have to re-platform again. But in any case, thank you for watching. Please like, comment, share, do all the things. And I will see you in my next video. Okay, bye!